Welcome to Talking Books. I'm Michelle Martin. Today we ask, what has the world learned from the recent global financial crises? And is another crisis inevitable?
We haven't been able to fix the problems of the Eurozone, which remains mired in difficulty and vulnerable to further crises. And I think we've become too complacent about the risks.
I speak with Martin Wolf, Associate Editor and Chief Economics Commentator at the Financial Times. He was also awarded the CBE, Commander of the British Empire. Wolf is the author of The Shifts and the Shocks, What We've Learned and Still Have to Learn from the Financial Crisis, published by Penguin Press. He is critical of austerity and holds no punches when it comes to the reform he thinks still needs to happen. Later, hear my pick for Book of the Week. But first, more of my interview with Martin Wolf. Welcome to Talking Books. I'm Michelle Martin. He's one of the world's foremost economic commentators. Martin Wolf, author of The Shifts and the Shocks, joins us this morning. Martin, more than 6 years ago, the global economy faced a meltdown. Your latest book examines the 2007-2008 financial crisis. What have we learned? If you look at a global political prescription or global leaders, have they taken lessons to heart, in your opinion? What has been fixed?
Well, I think it's quite interesting to ask ourselves what we have, what we've done, and how far we've done what is needed. Now, the book's argument is about what happened is quite complicated, and so it presents quite a big set of challenges for leaders. Essentially, what I argue is that the crisis reached this scale because of a combination of huge shifts in the whole world economy, particularly globalization, technological change, the emergence of countries previously very poor and very large, notably China, though not exclusively, which became huge capital exporters. And these sets of changes destabilized the global macroeconomic system. And then the response to these changes, particularly in the West, was to encourage a huge credit boom, or to facilitate and allow a huge credit boom in order to generate the demand that we were losing as a result of shifts in income distribution and very large external deficits. These processes were offset temporarily by huge credit bubbles. So that's what happened. And it follows from this that what we need to do is to deal with, at least with some of these immense macroeconomic shifts to the extent that we can, and also to make the financial sector much more robust. Now, against that standard, what have we actually done? Well, I describe what I call the new orthodoxy, which is essentially much the same monetary policy as before. So we still have inflation targeting. It didn't work too well for us before the crisis because it allowed these huge financial disequilibria to emerge, and along with the continuation of this sort of monetary policy, we also have decided that we need much tighter financial regulation, particularly so-called macroprudential regulation, which is a way of overseeing the financial sector as a whole to make sure it doesn't get too unstable. Now, I argue in my book that these are, particularly the latter, are definitely improvements. So this path of re-regulation, which was started by the group of 20 leading countries already in 2009, so it's right at the beginning, has been a real improvement. And I think on the whole, the financial sector is substantially more robust than it was before. So this is not nothing. However, it's still much the same financial sector. It still has huge areas that are not transparent, really quite opaque. It's still very highly leveraged, not as highly leveraged as before. Our economies as a whole are even more leveraged now than before, partly because public debt has risen so much, and partly because in some cases private debt has not reduced as much as we would like. We haven't been able to fix the problems of the Eurozone, which remains mired in difficulty and vulnerable to further crises. And I think we've become too complacent about the risks. in these sort of financial sector areas. And beyond that, the really big shifts in the world economy, obviously the global imbalances have diminished a bit, but they're still quite large. Inequality continues to rise, which makes it more difficult to get the demand in our economies that we need. Mm-hmm. So I would say we have made some progress. It's important progress in making the system more robust. But it remains in essence the same, and for that reason I'm concerned that it remains in essence still very vulnerable.
Mm-hmm. Mark Carney has pledged that taxpayer money should never again be used to prop up banks. Is this an important moment when it comes to global rules for dealing with too-big-to-fail banks?
Well, it's a very important promise, and I hope he's right.
938 Live, Money Talks Investment Outlook Seminar for 2015 is back, with the always entertaining Dr. Tan Kiwi. What can you expect in the year of the goat investment-wise, and what are the pitfalls to look out for?
That we can resolve banks, as it's called, convert debt into equity without causing huge crises and without huge difficulties. And if that were the case, then we can avoid either crisis on this scale or bailouts. I should stress that while bailouts, taxpayer support is unfortunate and clearly creates risks for the future, there are even worse things. I think there was no doubt that was the case in 2007 and 8. There are worse things than taxpayer bailouts. And the worst thing of all is total collapse of the financial system, a collapse of the economy, and a huge depression. Yeah. The fiscal costs of these bailouts, even the incentive costs, which I talked about, the impact on the banks, could be really quite small compared with the costs of a disaster. So the crucial test to me is not whether we can avoid bailing banks out, but what would be the costs of not bailing them out. That is to say, whether the financial system itself would work pretty well, even if there was no government support in a time of difficulty. And on that, I hope very much Mark Carney is right, but we won't know until the next crisis. And there remains very substantial fragility. These remain very highly leveraged institutions, even in the current situation. They don't need to lose a large amount of their value before they get close to insolvent. And we don't really know what will happen in that. I tried to point out the crisis itself was caused by really quite a small set of financial events. Mm-hmm. The losses in subprime mortgages, the losses in Ireland or Spain were actually objectively quite small, yet it basically blew up the whole financial system. Now, if that can happen with such relatively small losses, what would happen if there were some really big losses on massive assets of the financial sector? And we don't know the answer, so we can't be confident that this no bailout principle will actually work without immense damage to our economies.
Right. What do you think will be the impact of last week's U.S. elections on the U.S. and global economies?
That's a very big question and a very good one. The immediate impact on U.S. policy, I think, is likely to be relatively small. The one possibility, which is discussed, is that it will make it easier for the U.S. To get trade promotion authority. This might make it easier then to agree and negotiate the so-called TPA and TPIP with Asia and with Europe, which the U.S. is now trying to negotiate. So that will be moderately trade promoting and therefore probably beneficial. And that will be a positive benefit. There is some discussion that there might be a limited room now for tax reform in the U.S. That might help the U.S. economy a little, though I think the benefits of that are often greatly exaggerated. In other areas, at least as long as it remains a divided house, as it were, with the Congress in the hands of one party and the presidency in the hands of the other, the likelihood is that the gridlock will largely continue over a whole range of policy issues. And so the impact on the global economy will be modest. The newly elected Congress obviously wants to lower or reduce the burden of financial regulation, which in some areas is, I think, probably perfectly sensible, or some of it's perfectly sensible, but in practice it's very unlikely to be able to get that through over the veto of the president. I think almost inconceivable. So I think in that area, as with many others, gridlock will continue to apply, and we outside, at least in the economic sphere, will not notice any big changes.
Singapore managed the impact of the economic crisis in 2007 pretty well. What is your impression of the Singapore economy now, and how do you think it could perform in the years ahead? Martin Wolf answers that question after this. Stay tuned to Talking Books. Welcome to Talking Books, the all-new expanded edition. I'm Michelle Martin. We continue with renowned financial commentator Martin Wolf. Singapore managed the impact of the economic crisis in 2007 pretty well. What is your impression of the Singapore economy now, and how do you think it could perform in the years ahead?
This is obviously a well-regulated economy, always has been a well-regulated economy. Its performance has been, over the long term, since its establishment as an independent country, absolutely astonishingly good. One of the world's truly most remarkable successes. Now, success, of course, makes it more difficult to continue. Singapore is now a very rich country with a very high income, and so it cannot compete in any way on labor costs. Obviously, that goes without saying. It has to compete by being open to foreign direct investment, as it always has been, supplying the highest quality labor, being innovative, above all, flexible and adaptable. But I think there's no doubt that growing rapidly in future, particularly also given its demography, its aging, is going to be quite a challenge. And I would guess it will settle down to a mature, relatively slow-growing, advanced economy. And that will be a very satisfactory fate. It is a price of success. But such huge success as is achieved obviously makes it very difficult to continue, really impossible to continue with anything like the same sort of dynamism.
Economists forecast that China will ascend to the world's largest economy by 2016. What, in your opinion, needs to happen for China to take on the responsibility of being such a large economy in the world?
This measure will be, well, it depends on how it's judged. I presume we are still talking about purchasing power parity,
yes,
which is adjusted for difference in costs of goods and, above all, services across countries. Seems to me very unlikely, though I haven't seen the very latest estimates, that China will be the largest economy at market prices next in just 2 years. But it's clearly very, very likely to happen fairly soon. The implications of that are really very difficult to assess, partly because it's a new thing. In the last 150 years or so, the biggest economies, certainly the most influential economies, have been also the most advanced economies, the ones with the highest incomes and the most advanced technologies. First the UK after the Industrial Revolution, and then, above all, the US. Now, China would be the biggest because it's such a huge country in terms of population. But even so, it remains really quite a poor country. It's sort of very much in the middle of the global rankings in terms of average productivity. Now, this combination is something new, and so it would have sheer scale. There's no doubt about it. It would have tremendous influence through its impact on trade. It will almost certainly be, and in some respects already is, the world's biggest trader. It would obviously become more important in currency markets. Its currency is becoming more important. These are all impacts of sheer scale, but it would not be the world's technology leader yet. That's likely to be postponed for quite a while longer. It would still have many fragilities and weaknesses which are associated with being more a developing country than an advanced country. Indeed, the Chinese themselves insist it is still a developing country in many respects. And I think, broadly speaking, they're still right. I mean, this is really still, on average, quite a poor country. So we would have this country which would be very big and powerful in some respects, and still not that advanced, not a world leader in other and important respects. And the implications of that are not clear. Now, you asked me in that context what role China can play as a leader. Mm-hmm. I think that it's partly the questions there are partly the consequence of this sort of rather mixed status that China is likely to have in over the next 20 years. And I hope that it will continue to support an open world economy, that it will remain committed to the World Trade Organization rules and contribute to liberalization. I hope that a way will be found, and this is more a burden on the West than for China, to incorporate China and Chinese interests properly and completely in international organizations like the IMF and the World Bank. Mm-hmm. I hope that the Chinese will feel that the basic structures of the open international economic system from which it has benefited so greatly are ones to which it will itself feel committed and which it will wish to support to a greater extent, perhaps ideally, even than Western powers have done. If that were to happen, then we would have an immense strengthening of the global order. It can remain ideally harmonious and open. Obviously, that also depends on geopolitical relationships. And I would be very optimistic. Of course, if that doesn't happen, we could have many big disputes, and we do have to recognize from the past that times when there are very large transitions, very big and important transitions in power in the world economic system and in the relations of nations, often very difficult and very dangerous. The most obvious parallel is what happened in the period between the First and Second World Wars.
Well, yours is a very big and important book if it can help us reduce the risk of another crisis. Mr. Wolf, thank you so much.
I'm very grateful. It's a very enjoyable interview.
You're listening to the all-new Expanded Talking Books. I'm Michelle Martin. My book pick for you this week is A Short Ride in the Jungle, The Ho Chi Minh Trail by motorcycle, and it is by Antonio Bolingbroke Kent. By the end of the Vietnam War, the jungle had reclaimed the military transport network. Unexploded bombs littered the Ho Chi Minh Trail that ran along the border of Laos, Cambodia, and Vietnam. 1,000 kilometers in total, and contrary to its name, the trail consists of a series of trails. It was used by North Vietnam to transport food and supplies, even weapons and troops to the south. The Ho Chi Minh Trail was a road that former producer of the BBC series World's Most Dangerous Roads, Antonio Bolingbroke Kent, found herself on in an unexpected recce trip. I love this book. It provides all the entertainment for me that one needs for the weekend. This book ticks all the boxes for me. It allows us, the reader, to explore one of the world's most deadliest roads, and the author's writing vividly imprints scenes into one's mind. After all, she is a TV producer, and so her writing really draws up images for the reader. It is also a book about possibly the first female to travel the trail. The book answers a host of questions like who built the Ho Chi Minh Trail, who walked it, who bombed it, and who died on it. It is an adventure of the highest order. This is travelogue at its absolute best. My book pick for you this week is A Short Ride in the Jungle. It's by Antonia Bolingbroke Kent. Don't miss it. It's terrific. Enjoy the read and keep reading. I'm Michelle Martin. This is Talking Books.